Hello, good morning or good afternoon, or wherever in fact you are. So today, thank you for joining me. I'm joined by Ben Dobson, who is our manager of voice engineering. And today on this LoopUp Live Talking Teams, we are going to be talking about devices. So, Ben, I think it's fair to say we've got a reasonable amount of ground to cover with devices in Teams, but
Yeah, there's quite a bit there. Yeah,
we'll do our best in the next 20 or 30
we'll go
minutes or
through.
so. But devices in Teams. I guess let's start with what do we mean when we talk about devices in Teams? Like, what is it that we might be referring to there?
Well, I think devices in general these days are it's becoming more and more because it's the thing that hangs off the end of everything that we're doing part of telephony. And I mean, I've been in this game what 10 years now, especially UC. I think devices are becoming more and more niche for certain areas of the product set that you're trying to get into, whether it's collaboration, whether it's just hanging off the end of a phone, whether it's just something that's in a cafe. You're trying to use something to get the best quality out into a service like LoopUp provide on the DR side of things. Split down the middle, really. Um,
So devices, when we're talking about them for Teams, we mean the thing that a user is interacting with that is capturing the voice, possibly the video, and
Video,
dealing with sending that down the other end. And I guess one of the reasons that's kind of important to consider the different devices is it doesn't matter how good a computer you've got, how good an internet connection you got, how
absolutely.
good a telephony provider you've got. If you're getting bad audio into the system, you're going to get bad audio through the system. So,
It is, yeah.
I guess talking about devices, I kind of like to split them roughly into two categories, which is you've kind of got personal devices or shared devices. And personal devices would be things like handsets or headsets, which we've got on today. And then shared devices can be also handsets or devices that you use in different meeting spaces.
Yeah.
If we look at headsets as a starting point, what sort of thing do you think are the crucial considerations or things that a customer should be looking at when they're looking at rolling out headsets?
Well, I think with headsets, I mean, the old cliche was try and use a certified device. I mean, we've had
Hmm.
clients in the past over the years that have gone to Tesco's and bought the old yellow and pink. Do you remember them, the audio device ones? The old school ones. And the quality is bad. And unfortunately, as you said, if you're piping something in that's bad, you're gonna get the quality out bad at the same time. So
And you say certified. Certified by who? By the manufacturers? By someone else? What does that mean?
well, at the minute, certified really comes from the platform that you'll plug it into. So in this case, Microsoft. Microsoft will lead that way in certified devices. They will give us what you should and what you shouldn't be using. And I think over the years, a lot of vendors and suppliers have already tried to push that certification early on, going over the length of time, like Poly and Logitech. They've been working close with Microsoft to try and give them that the best quality, whether that be audio or video, any device that hangs off it, with Microsoft, and work with them to get the best quality out of everything they're doing. So I think if we go to headsets from a certified perspective, there are a couple of types. So we work with Blackwire, we work with Bluetooth, we work with DEC. They've all got their ups and downs.
Hmm.
And I mean, for me personally, I think Blackwire is probably the best one because you're going to get that direct quality. You've got no interference around you. You've not got anyone else with the same ranges or Bluetooth interference. And, I
So
have
Blackwire,
worked,
you mean a hardwired headset into
yeah,
the
hardwire it
computer?
straight in, straight into a USB port.
Says
They
says
are
the guy with the
the best.
wireless headset in his ear.
Yeah, we don't put, there is, I'm sure there's a, yeah, that's not, yeah, that's preference, Ben, just preference.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so I think from a Blackwire perspective, that is going to be the best quality as long as it's certified from Microsoft going forward.
And if it looks like there's many different headsets for different kind of usages, from single ear to dual ear to ones that double as good music devices, or ones you can use when you're out running with your mobile, but are also certified. I think the other important thing to mention is certified is not just quality, but it's also functionality and feature set. It means that the mute button
Absolutely,
synchronizes with Teams, or the call answer button works, etc., etc.
absolutely, yeah, and yeah, yeah.
The thing, one of the other interesting things you said there was, DECT or Bluetooth. Are there any particular considerations an organization should look at if they're considering, say, deploying Bluetooth across an entire floor of a business?
You know what? It's one of the questions that come up, especially the length of time I've been doing this. But it's all about space. At the end of the day, if you're sharing channels and you're close in close proximity to others that have the same technology, there's going to be overlap. And we have noticed cases where proximity to others can cause degradation in quality, jitter, drops, most importantly. So the biggest consideration is that distance. I think at the minute, with everything that's going on, we're not worried about distance because we're all at home. Hopefully that will change soon. But yeah, that's one of the biggest selling points of anything really. And it's the same as, if we're using anything that's Wi-Fi based, if you're hopping between certain devices, you're going to have that loss, that close interaction that may cause a quality degradation. So that's definitely the biggest thing to be wary of any Bluetooth or text device.
Well, so that's kind of headsets in a nutshell of roughly the different kinds. But you tend to find a lot of companies who are considering Teams telephony maybe had a lot of desk phones kicking around their organization. What's the story with Teams and desk phones there?
I think desk phones, they're gone are the days where desk phones are paramount to companies. I think a lot of companies, depending on the type of company, whether it be law firms or it may be trading desks, they still have that requirement to pick up a device, put it on their shoulder. It's more of a culture thing than anything. And a lot of, over the past years, that has changed from a desk to a smaller device like myself on the ear, like you with this one going over there. So I can't remember the last time for me personally, I used a desk phone. But yeah, so one of the big things about desk phones is that they can be costly. But most importantly, there are different types of desk phones that can be used in these scenarios as well, whether they are just dummy phones or they are the full feature set that others are looking for, such as calendar integration or the full-blown Teams integration. And that's a big thing in itself.
What's the sort of standard form factor for a Teams phone? Because I think originally when Teams launched, there was kind of one particular format that was the type you had to purchase. Unfortunately, we've diversified because the whole sort of point here is there's choice, right? And that's what you can help navigate, is that making the right choices at the right point. But when you say a standard Teams phone, what's to somebody who's come from a Cisco handset or something like that, where it's kind of or maybe an older school device with the grayscale screens, what does the standard Teams handsets mean?
Well, the Teams handsets, a lot of it goes back to presence. I think presence is probably the biggest thing that's, I think, revolutionized the whole UC industry as a whole. Are you available or are you not available? So the integration from a desk phone, especially if you're in an office, looking over at someone just to see if they're on the phone or not, that's a big telling point. But to physically see that from a software point of view is quite important as well, especially in this, again, long distance way of working. So when we look at phones in general, the Teams affiliation with them, we want to be able to see things on the phone as well as Teams client that are matching up and synchronizing as best they can. Hence, going back to our certified device question earlier, where that certification is quite crucial when it comes to this stuff, because everything that's in Teams you want to be able to control on that phone as well. Whether you're logged into your client on the system or the phone, they need to be synchronous together.
So you're signed in as your Teams entity to that device. You can see the status of what's happening in Teams if you need to. You can see your calendar. You can click to join and interact with it, which is sort of functionality that once upon a time would be more in the meeting room side of things. Like
absolutely.
What about in scenarios where you just need a phone to be a phone? Like what are your choices there?
So this is a sore point for a lot of people, because I think this is where we come into budgets, because companies can save money doing enumeration based on any of the equipment that we come through these days. There is no need, if you're looking for a device that's sat in a reception area or something that's in a lift, for instance, it doesn't need that full functionality of a Teams client to be sat on that phone. So a dummy phone for those just ring, answer and drop scenarios are the best ones to do, and that can dramatically drop the price as well, which is quite important. Poly do them, Logitech do them as just dummy sets as well. So a lot of it is about enumerating and make sure that functionality is done correctly from the beginning, to make sure that we're rolling out what's needed rather than spending over the odds to make sure the functionality is overburdened for the end user.
And you said there about like dummy phones. That brings to mind, like you can also get the kind of phones that are essentially just USB handsets, aren't they? That they don't have any processing power particularly themselves, and just act like a USB device to the computer if you need that sort of a thing, that for accessibility reasons or something else, that you need to have a handset.
Absolutely.
To hang on
to. And when we come back to the USB side of things, we used to have pass through in the day with Ethernet as well, with the PoE, and the USB used to you have to have the physical system on to make that link. But I must admit, over the past 5 years, I mean, the USB side of things is just dropping off because it
Yeah.
is all PoE and completely network based now. And I think a lot of it is having that step away from your main Teams client on a system to be able to just to use a phone without having the need to look at everything else. So that calendar integration and meeting integration and notification presence can all be controlled by this phone now. And as I go back years ago, you didn't have that option. They had to be one and the other, but now they are just a singular entity, which is quite nice.
And how would you suggest an organization approaches, looking at where they need phones? Would you, what sort of percentage would you suggest headset versus handset? Is it just replace like for like, or is there a particular kind of mapping you would do there?
It's a big one there because that opens up a wide variety of questions, and we have had customers that have this exact scenario on a large scale and a smaller scale. But the thing and the key here is enumeration. It's about gathering as much information on a use case as you can before the device rollout or preparation or purchasing. And a lot of it we find that customers are used to culture, and culture inside of a customer's environment is very important because people are used to using the same piece of equipment. Sometimes they're averse to change, which is totally understandable if someone's been using a device for many years. So it's trying to find out that feature and functionality of what the end users require before the decision's made just to go and buy a load of, say, 100 rather expensive phones for the
Yeah.
need and the use cases. So and the second thing is about questioning if those devices are needed. So as I said on the culture-based thing, some will be adverse to having the desk phones taken away. And I understand that. Everyone's used to it, and this is what we've been using for years. But as the technology does progress, and there is a reason for that as well, because it can affect budgets for companies. So it is all about having that key data analysis on a global scale inside your company first and getting that right to make sure that you need these devices, and most importantly, when you do get them, that you're buying the right thing for that
Yeah.
use case. It's a big
And
thing.
there's a class of device that we haven't necessarily talked about, which is the SIP compatible devices. But that feeds into a question from Oliver, I think, that's come in on the chat there. That
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
just set the scene that the SIP compatible devices are the ability to take certain third party manufacturer devices that operate a reasonably standard SIP stack, register them against the Teams service through a special gateway, and then they will download a version of the firmware that will interact and sign in against Teams and give you a portion of the Teams
Yeah.
functionality on those devices. Now, not the same as a Teams native device because they're not touch panel devices and that sort of stuff. But if a company has got a whole stack of those devices, does it make sense that they can reuse that investment? I think the answer is yes. But
Yeah.
what's your view on, should you be looking at going down the native Teams route with Teams core calling devices or native touch, or would you look at kind of purchasing afresh some of those SIP type devices?
See, me personally, I mean, 3-pip has come a long way. I mean, over the past couple of years, that it used to be an absolute pain to put in, but now it has become easier, especially the way Teams is allowing us to manage it from inside the TAC as well. But I think the important thing is come back to what I just said a minute ago, is enumeration of what's required. If
Mm,
a company can save money by reusing devices, and it can be used for the same sort of presence, so if we're just sending and receiving a call, perfect. It's absolutely a brilliant way to save money and ensure that we can still get that quality of service down to that device. But on the other side of things, the devices that we are using, it must be compatible, tested,
yeah,
ensure that you're getting that quality, because that will then differentiate if you want to move on and need to purchase for, it could be the better internal components of that device. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I have worked with customers in the past that have the old Beanatone touch that still want to put it through some form of analog device to try and get that
yeah,
quality. But the way the quality has changed, especially with HD audio these days, and the G711 really trying to push it down to those clients, we've got to make sure that those devices can, more importantly, produce that audio that we want. So
yeah.
it's
And
definitely
they,
it's a good one.
and the other scenario there is looking at new devices if you're buying new. I mean, I think the answer for me is I personally wouldn't go down that route of buying third party interop devices. I'd look at the Teams core calling
Yep.
devices, which will maybe be a tiny bit more expensive, but they, I think, would have a little bit more longevity in them. The problem
Yeah.
with the third party gateway stuff is you're reliant on support continuing to be there. And with the Teams core calling, it's the Microsoft provided operating system across core calling and native touch and the video devices, so you get kind of a common experience with them. Whereas those third-party interop devices, you're a little bit more dependent on what the hardware is capable of, or where buttons are laid out and what it's doing. So
I agree.
if you're new
Yeah.
to the ecosystem, I'd kind of stick in the native ecosystem.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I said, and that kind of goes back to what we said, having that compatibility into the system is paramount, because at the end of the day, users are going to be using the equipment. I mean, non-technical individuals, so we could be talking any department that's non-technical, they are the ones using devices, and they're the ones that are going to be critiquing the quality of the solution that's been put in as well. So we need to keep the end customer happy, as well as ensuring that support and renewal and and product help is still there in 5 years from the time that system's put in using old devices. And as you just said there, purchasing, I think Oliver's just said it as well, but purchasing new instead of not reusing is great. If you're willing to spend that extra 10-15% with a device that, yes, is very toned down for that situation, so a cap device or something like that, that's probably the better way
Common
to
area
go.
phone, right?
Common area phones, yeah, sorry. So capped common area phones in situations where you're just kind of covered from that longevity for that support. So if the device fails, you can still get it. But if we're using older devices, we must take that into account as well. And we've seen it. We have seen it with customers wanting to do that. But sometimes keeping the old is not as good as thinking longevity for the device.
So that sort of rounds out personal devices. What about shared devices? So what do we mean by a shared device?
Yeah, so shared devices, these are one of my favorite things that come to any type of device, because I love a good new thing to play with. So shared devices, we're talking about meeting rooms, obviously the most obvious thing here, which we can have audio and video in a shared collaborative environment, all in one room when we could do it back in the day. And that can break down to certain areas as well. So we can have huddle spaces, we can get together in collaborational meeting rooms. It's that whole getting together, but importantly, it's bringing others into that huddle group, which is outside of that area as well, but in a very, I guess, susceptible technical way to allow to get the quality in.
Well, that's kind of the phrase that's going around, isn't there, about
Yeah,
hybrids, like hybrid meeting rooms, which
exactly.
always confuses me, because I've still got kind of an old school brain that hybrid means, relating to like Skype for Business
Yeah,
Online or
both.
something like that.
Yeah,
But I guess
right.
hybrid meeting rooms is when we're talking about we need to have in the same meeting people who are, in a room working together, a handful of people who are joining, from the same company, on Teams or whatever the platform is, and whoever the remote, far end participants are. That's what we mean by hybrid, and it's making sure that everybody gets a fair share at having a good experience. Because I guess it's very easy for people all in a room to shout over the top of, or
Yeah,
not give much of a chance to anybody remote. But we're now having to kind of that's not an uncommon scenario these days. It used to just be one or two people, and now it's like, well, the majority of the meeting is actually remote, and there's not many
yeah.
people in the room. And that's where, again, we're starting to get kind of technology solutions to some of those things. So if we're talking meeting room devices in Teams, and what are the core devices that are native Teams meeting room things there?
Well,
What can we do?
yeah, well, I think the main thing is it depends on the type of device, and again, going back to the enumeration of what we need before we purchase. But there are two main types here. We've got audio and we've got video. I mean, video is great, and as you said, it's all about having the hybrid workspace outside of that meeting, the capability for someone to raise their hand or be seen to be raising their hand to interject maybe that meeting. Because you hit it on the nail there. Over talking is the biggest problem in any type of collaborational set that we do these days, and it still happens, and people mute themselves, and we all have a big giggle about it, and we all move on. But yeah, the two main types of the audio and video side of things at the minute. But I think the way Microsoft are going, especially with things such as Surface Hubs, it's
Mhm.
not just about the
Cheers.
audio and video. Yeah, ta-da, just like that. And here's one I made earlier.
Yeah,
And the
on my
Surface
fake
Hubs,
background.
it's a nice, lovely one. I think Surface Hubs are a wonderful experience. I mean, we put them in for clients and customers, and I've worked with them for many years as well. And to have that collaborative white space share set is
So
wonderful.
that's almost like a third category, isn't it? That it's the collaboration aspect. It's not just voice.
Completely.
It's not just video. It's collaboration. I mean, kind of the core, device type, if you like, is the Teams meeting rooms, right? And then you've got
Yep.
ones that run Windows at their core, and then you've got ones that run Android at their core. And kind
Android.
of
Yep.
interestingly, the Surface Hub was slightly outside of that
It
lineup
was.
until fairly recently. Now the
Hmm.
experience that you get on, the Teams meeting rooms devices is pretty much equivalent to what you get on a Surface Hub now, and
It
as
is
well as
now.
taking the
Yeah.
advantage of some of the touch and pen
Yeah,
capabilities.
and they've really kept that close. And I think the way that's done is fantastic, because someone can transition from a whiteboard to a Teams client to a shared collaborative space and still have the same sort of UI to feel comfortable moving between those devices and
Well,
allow
and
people
that's
outside. So
that's the important thing to me, isn't it?
yeah,
I assume you agree. It's having a commonality of experience that
yeah,
if you're in a small huddle space and it's just got a speakerphone in it, making sure that the interface to that speakerphone looks and feels familiar in the same way that when they walk into a boardroom or a large scale conference room, that it's an easy, straightforward experience to touch. Start the meeting, add your
absolutely.
screen share, plug your laptop in, whatever it may be. And I think to me, it's quite interesting seeing like where we're testing them out in some of our kind of little booths. You get, the likes of Dell have Teams monitors. Like, a few
Yeah,
years ago, what on earth would a Teams monitor be? And it's like, well, actually, it's a USB-C connection that goes into your laptop. You take your laptop into the little space, plug that USB-C connection in. You've got a second screen. You've got a certified webcam built into the top of it. You've got certified microphone and speakers for a call quality, on the sides of the screen, and that is now an all-in-one experience for you've plugged in and you're up and running with good quality equipment. Now, there's
it
still
is.
going to be
Yeah.
issues around making sure that the room doesn't bounce noise around too much or any of that sort of stuff. But that kind of variety in the type of devices is very encouraging to me. Again, like in our refurbishment that we've just done, we've deployed some mixture of Surface Hub and Logitech equipment. But one of the reasons with the Logitech equipment, and the other manufacturers all have their pros and cons in different areas, but they have a touch controller that works in different ways depending on how you deploy it. But it means that in each room there is a little square touch screen that you can walk into and you can say that's my meeting, or I want a new meeting, or I want to
Yeah.
ring you, Ben, whatever it is. But that
Hmm.
works the same across all of
The board.
those different kind of spaces.
I think it really helps that, as you said, that experience is really, it's really imperative. It's very the same throughout all the technology, because that helps the adverse to change type situations. People will feel more comfortable moving on to new technologies, rather than sticking with some of the old ways of working. So it helps them through that process as well. Again, going back to what we said earlier, it's making sure that everyone's comfortable, that we get them through the process without too much change, but going on and moving forward with the
Yeah.
technology.
And then it's also worth maybe touching that there's a couple of innovations that have come along, or maybe three or four recently, to the Teams client. That it's not just the hardware side, but there's stuff like Teams music streaming, which is designed to optimize high fidelity audio over a Teams meeting, or NDI, which is network device interface, or serial digital interface (SDI). They're ways that you can take super high-end mixing desks and manipulate the streams directly in and out of your Teams client. So if you do have some very bespoke requirements or particular kind of broadcast style things that you need to be doing with clever things, that's possible.
And I think it's really important there, because I think Microsoft and the way the devices are going are allowing this technology in to use different use cases outside of the UC world that we all see, know, and love today. So other companies that are, as you said, broadcasting, for instance, can start to use the technology through the Microsoft ecosystem to present. Whereas we go back years ago, we were tied to a particular company that only allows us to have this set of equipment or this way of doing things. They can start to introduce other ways and other, I think, functionality in through their platform. And that's one of the biggest, I think, selling points and talking points in the moment about the NDI and SDI stuff as well.
Yeah. So, one thing we haven't touched on is device management. It's all very well if you've done some of those steps we've talked about and you've chosen what devices you might want and you're deploying hundreds of them out in the field, potentially thousands. What are your choices for being able to look after those devices? How easy is it?
Yeah, I'd love to say it's easy, but it's never easy. It's always the most challenging part of any device deployment. There are a couple of tools. I mean, going back over the years, Poly had their own way of doing things, and I said some of the technical folk on the stream may know that we used to have to use TFTP servers and MAC addresses to control the way we used
DHCP
to do it.
options, yeah,
Exactly, yeah. And then Poly and Logitech started to basically put these web UIs on top of them. So the two big players at the minute are the Poly PDMS, which is the device management service,
yeah.
with Poly themselves, and it literally is just a nice UI, but it still uses the same technology underneath with controlling file names and controlling MAC addresses to ensure that all the devices are capable together and managed in a singular place. And also Logitech have their sync platform as well, which is pretty awesome, to be quite fair. So yeah,
And
it's
is
the
there
big
any
players.
kind of native management built into Teams for devices?
Yeah, so coming out the TAC now, they are starting to roll out the firmware, especially with the 3-pip devices. We can control that from the top down level now. So I think Microsoft is starting to bring this stuff together inside as in part of their ecosystem now to help control this from a single location instead of us having to go off and have multiple cloud different logins and vendors and all these different access to credentials. And this is the way I like it's going. It is, yeah.
If I've got it right, so I think through TAC you can sort of apply device
You
configuration
can.
profiles, and you get a reasonable amount of reporting. Now, it's not
Yeah,
necessarily going
it's
to
not
be as
perfect, but
detailed or
it's
as in depth
no.
as you might need, but I think actually back to one of the 3-pip kind of question before in the SIP gateway, that's kind of one of the criticisms about having phones on that SIP gateway is effectively you're now managing and registering them direct against Teams. So you're kind of you've only got the ability to manage them or deal with them through
Yeah.
Teams. You can't do any of that through whatever other management portal or platform you might do. And it might be that your mileage may vary. That might be okay, or it might be that you need to be able to customize what they're up to a little bit more.
I think it is, and I think that customization comes with growth. I think it's dependent on the scalability and large amount of devices that you want to look after. I mean, doing everything like that in Teams, as you said, is great, but there is limited functionality there for now, and that may change later on. But I
Yeah.
mean, looking at some of the bigger, like the PDMS and the sync products from the bigger vendors, they are great on a global scale. And it's definitely something to look out for. But who knows, the way Microsoft may swing it a little bit and allow us to do more inside of the tag. So
That's
we'll
true.
see how it
And
goes.
then,
Yeah.
there's again, there might be some vendor specific stuff that only show in their portal, like being able to do
Yeah.
your attendee count or attendance counting in a room or all that sort of stuff. So I guess we're nearly sort of getting to the bottom of the hour. What would be your summary to wrap up how a company should approach their device strategy? You know,
I really do think, I mean, based on experience of the deployments I've done in the past on larger and smaller scales, it is all about enumeration. It's all about seeing what the company needs, seeing if the devices are required, but also helping that adverse to change culture, which sits in many companies today, come through that based on experience with the devices
yeah.
themselves. It's really important these
And
days.
I guess, when we were just chatting before this, mentioning no names, but you were saying there was an example of a customer you were working with who they were all geared up to kind of be a bit more fluid, a bit more modern in their approach to devices. And effectively it boiled down to they ended up replacing phones like for like with new phones on the new platform because of three people in HR who
Yeah.
didn't get on board and didn't
Didn't
understand
want
it.
to do it. And it's really interesting to see how that culture, just with a single department, can influence the whole company, where you may have 80% that are willing for change, but that 20% can keep it. So, and it comes down to what we said earlier, it's all about the experience. If the experience can be mimicked as much as we can of what someone's used to now to the end result of moving on to modern technology, that's the path that should be taken. Ripping out and replacing is not the way to do it, because adversity will kick in with the individual, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's human factor. That's how we all work.
I
So
mean, one thing I find interesting over the last few years is the debate about headsets has gone away. You used to have a lot of
yeah.
kickback about
Oh
headsets,
yeah.
not for headset's sake, but because of the wearing a band or looking like you worked in a call center or any of that. But it's a lot
That's
more
right.
ubiquitous now. That, and again, this is where the breadth of devices available are. They're smarter devices, more consumer orientated looking devices, while still
Mm.
being professional ones. But it's interesting that sort of pushback has eased a little bit. So
It's all that choice. Yeah.
I guess just kind of wrapping out then from our point of view, you know, we're here to help a customer through their journey to the Teams platform. So offering advice and guidance around how to best navigate, looking at what sort of devices you've got, mapping out what your choices might be in Teams, and helping with that, you know, enumeration or persona building to see what will work where in what
It
situation.
is. Absolutely. I mean, and this is one of the big things, especially the team that I look after, and we're all about making sure that what we are putting in is the right thing for our customers. Because the last thing we want to do is just put in something that, again, the adversity to change is going to throw a rift and balance the boat for them. So it's
Mm,
all about finding out what they need, making sure what they are doing is mostly cost effective for them. And I think trimming the fat is always good in the device sector, because there are things that can come down in cost, and like Oliver was saying earlier on about reusing devices as
yeah,
well
what your
is a big
choices might
factor.
be.
So as opposed to buying new, but there is a balance between purchasing new for longevity and support rather than reusing, having to change again in a year. So it's definitely a big factor. It's all about asking and enumeration for sure.
Good stuff. All right. Well, Ben, thank
Mhm.
you very much for your time today, and
No problem.
thank you to everyone out there who's joined us. You know, pop us a note on LinkedIn if there's any comments, questions, anything for upcoming topics, and hopefully we'll see you in February, which isn't going to be too far away because it's quite a short month. So, thanks very
Bye
much.
now.
Bye bye.
Thanks all.